Title: The $450 Trailer Trap. A Judge Judy nightmare of deceit and stolen dreams that air in the television studio courtroom was thick with a tense, electric anticipation, a feeling that a storm was about to break, and presiding over it all, with an expression of unimpressed skepticism, was the one and only Judge Judy. On one side of the divide sat the plaintiffs, a couple named Megan and David Miller, their faces etched with the kind of weary frustration that comes from being wronged and then forced to fight for what was rightfully theirs. They looked like honest, hard-working people who had saved their pennies for a small dream, only to have it snatched away in the most humiliating fashion imaginable. Opposite them sat the defendant, a woman named Linda, who possessed a defiant, almost casual air, and beside her boyfriend Chad, who radiated a low-grade, simmering hostility that suggested he was always just one sharp word away from an outburst. This wasn't just a case about a trailer. It was a collision of two realities, and Judge Judy was the only force capable of determining which one would shatter. The story began not in a courtroom, but on a dusty property in Ventura, where a forgotten, aging trailer sat silently, holding within its rusted frame the seeds of this very conflict. Megan and David Miller had known Linda in a past life, a simpler time of straightforward transactions. They had bought chickens from her boyfriend Chad, a deal that had seemed innocuous enough, but now felt like a sinister prelude to a much larger con. It was during one of these visits that their eyes fell upon the dilapidated trailer, a hulk of metal and faded dreams just sitting there, and Linda, seeing an opportunity, had casually mentioned it was for sale. The hook was set. Megan and David Miller, envisioning a project, a chance to pour their sweat and love into something and make it their own, took the bait. They agreed on a price, $450, a sum of money that represented significant savings for a working couple, and they handed it over to Linda, trusting in the basic honesty of a person they considered an acquaintance. But even in that initial, seemingly simple exchange, a dark, ominous shadow lurked. Judge Judy, with the precision of a surgeon, went straight for the jugular of the story, her voice cutting through the studio air like a laser. And at the time they took the trailer, she demanded, her gaze locked onto Linda. Where did you tell them the title was to the trailer? The hesitation from Linda was palpable, a nervous flutter that spoke volumes. I didn't know where it was, she finally offered. A weak and flimsy defense. Judge Judy was having none of it. No, she snapped, the sound making everyone in the room jump. I want to know where you told them, and I don't want you to play with me. This was the first crack in Linda's story, the first sign that the foundation of her narrative was built on quicksand. Under this relentless pressure, Linda admitted she had only said she would look for it, a classic and telling stall tactic that anyone who has ever been swindled would recognize instantly. But Judge Judy was far from finished. She began to unravel the trailer's history, pulling on a thread that would soon unravel the entire tapestry of Linda's deception. The trailer had been on the property for 3 years. Before that, it was at Linda's last home in Camarillo, a home she had shared with her husband. This was the critical pivot, the moment the entire case turned. Whose name is on the title to the trailer? Judge Judy asked, her tone implying she already knew the devastating answer. Linda, cornered and with nowhere left to hide, uttered the words that sealed her fate. I believe it's my husband's. A collective, almost silent gasp seemed to ripple through the audience. Judge Judy, a master of dramatic timing, let the weight of that admission hang in the air for a long, heavy moment. Then, she went in for the kill. Did you tell that to Mr. and Mrs. Miller, that your husband's name was on the title? Linda, scrambling now, claimed she had told them in July, but Judge Judy was already way ahead of her. her mind having constructed the entire sordid scene. She presented her theory, a masterpiece of logical deduction. So they came, they looked at the trailer. They wanted to buy it, and what you want me to believe is you said to these two people, "The trailer belongs to my husband, and I will look for the title." And you settled on $450 for the trailer. That's what you want me to believe. The sheer absurd illogic of it was laid bare. To emphasize the point, Judge Judy crafted a brilliant cutting analogy that left the audience chuckling and Linda looking utterly defeated. It would be like someone offering to sell a Mercedes that belonged to a stranger just because they were standing next to it. The message was clear. Only a fool would make such a deal, and Megan and David Miller were no fools. The true depth of the Millers' nightmare was only just beginning to be revealed. They hadn't just lost $450. They had invested their hope. They took the trailer, a symbol of promised utility, and began to restore it. David Miller bought new tires for it, a tangible investment of another $200 into this dream. A receipt he now held in his hand as proof of his good faith and their compounded loss. This was no longer just a purchase. It was a project they had nurtured. But their dream was about to curdle into a Kafka-esque horror show. When they innocently went to the DMV to register their new asset, the floor dropped out from under them. The trailer was red-flagged. David Miller described the scene with a visceral terror that made the studio audience lean in, their hearts aching for him. He spoke of 2 highway patrolmen arriving, of the gut-wrenching fear that he and his wife Megan were about to be arrested. "Step out here," they were commanded. He described the humiliation, the panic, the sight of an officer reaching for his handcuffs. They were treated like common criminals, accused of being in possession of stolen merchandise, all because of Linda's lie. The emotional toll was evident in his voice. The shame, the fear, the violation of being made to feel like a criminal when they were the victims. They managed to talk their way out of handcuffs that day, but the ordeal was far from over. They were ordered to surrender the trailer, which they did, leaving it on a public street for weeks as they navigated a labyrinthine bureaucracy, calling the LAPD and DMV, who seemed to have no interest in their plight, adding layers of frustration and helplessness to their initial betrayal. Throughout this harrowing tale, Linda's boyfriend, Chad, grew increasingly agitated, his interruptions becoming more frequent and more belligerent. He was the source of the most expensive chickens they had ever bought, a bitter punchline that underscored how a simple, honest transaction had led them into this web of deceit. When Chad tried to interject, Judge Judy shut him down with a force that was both terrifying and magnificent. "Who are you?" she thundered, putting him in his place. His presence only served to highlight the toxic environment the Millers had been forced to deal with Megan later alleging they were harassed at their home, coming by at 9 p.m., a claim that Chad hotly denied, leading to more clashes and more gavel-rapping from Judge Judy to restore order. The climax of the case was a direct confrontation between the two competing truths. Linda had the audacity to claim she had offered the Millers a refund, a statement that was met with disbelief from the plaintiffs and a look of profound skepticism from Judge Judy. The judge saw through the transparent attempt to create a defense. She knew that the offer of a refund, if it ever happened, came only after the Millers had already improved the property, after they had been traumatized by the police, after their dream had been crushed. "I don't believe you," Judge Judy stated, her words final and absolute. She saw the entire ugly sequence for what it was. A deception born from Linda's desire for quick cash, with no regard for the devastating domino effect it would have on the lives of Megan and David Miller. In her final ruling, Judge Judy did what she does best. She delivered swift, clear, and uncompromising justice. She awarded Megan and David Miller every penny they were owed. the $450 for the trailer, and the $200 for the tires, a total of $650. But she also gave them something perhaps even more valuable: vindication. She publicly and powerfully affirmed that their version of events was the truth, that they were the wronged parties, and that Linda's actions were deceptive and indefensible. As the parties were excused, the lesson from Judge Judy was not just for them, but for everyone watching. It was a lesson in caution, in the hard-earned wisdom of the world. If you buy something that requires a title, you get the title at the moment of sale. When someone says, "I'll look for it," it is a blazing red flag that means, "I don't have it, and you will never get it." And most importantly, if a deal seems too good to be true, like a $450 trailer that should cost thousands, it almost always is. This case was a stark reminder that trust, once broken, can lead to a cascade of misery, and that the pursuit of justice, while arduous, is always a fight worth having. The $450 trailer was gone, but the lesson it taught about honesty, due diligence, and the consequences of deceit would resonate far beyond the walls of that television courtroom.